So I'm on my way home from work, and today I was working with some women who are showing me their charts and showing me, based on a chart, I can see what their hormones are doing. I can see what estrogen is doing and progesterone is doing. So today I wanted to share with you some thoughts about low progesterone. How to see that, how I see that based on a woman's charting, and also some of the symptoms that would show that maybe a woman does have low progesterone. That needs to be fixed. It's not just something that can be lived with and everything's okay. If there is some sort of hormonal imbalance and progesterone being too low, that does affect the woman in, family planning in the future, but also just for her quality of life for where she's at now. So we're going to talk about low progesterone today, how to even see if maybe this is something that you are struggling with. And don't mind me being in the car because we're driving home from work. So I'm glad you can join me on the ride. So low progesterone, let's talk about this. This is a very important topic. I've talked already in previous videos about just the cycle in general, the hormones, the main hormones that need to be ebbing and flowing throughout the cycle, right? And so I've talked about estrogen and I've talked about progesterone. Those are the two main female sex hormones that are super important and need to be well balanced for a healthy woman. So in the beginning of the cycle, pre-ovulation, the woman should have estrogen, or a lot of estrogen. Her estrogen is going to be high. Once she ovulates, she should be starting to produce progesterone. So progesterone is kind of the post-ovulatory hormone. This hormone we want to be really high and dominant in that post-ovulatory phase. And there's a few reasons for this. So just in general health, we want to make sure that progesterone is staying high for long enough in order to help the endometrium, or which is the uterine lining. There's a lining of blood cells that thicken throughout the cycle in the uterus. And so progesterone helps thicken that uterine lining. So for a period, a woman is seeing the uterine lining. That's what kind of sloughs off at her period when progesterone drops eventually, when it does. So it helps produce that endometrium and make it thick and lush. It also helps prevent any PMS symptoms. So I'll talk more about this in a minute, but if a woman is having severe PMS symptoms, or her symptoms are just lasting for a long time before she finally gets her period, that is a telltale sign of low progesterone, and that can really affect the quality of life for a woman before she gets her period. So that's super important to take into consideration. So the reason why progesterone is so important also for quality of life, in addition to that, it's also to sustain a pregnancy. So if a woman were to get pregnant, progesterone is the hormone that continues to keep that pregnancy and that newly formed life, that new baby, alive. And so progesterone, every single time a woman has her cycle, once she's post-ovulatory, her body doesn't know if she's pregnant or not yet. So no matter what, once she ovulates, her body's going to pretend that it is pregnant in case her body is pregnant. And so progesterone will rise. Now, after about 2 weeks post-ovulation, if the woman's body recognizes, okay, I'm not pregnant, I don't need this progesterone anymore, progesterone drops, and that's when she has her next period. But if a woman is pregnant, progesterone is the hormone that's going to maintain the pregnancy. And so her body keeps that uterine lining thick, and that's where that baby will implant into her uterus. It also keeps, I've talked about in the past how progesterone raises a woman's body temperature. And so her body needs to have heat in order to keep that baby alive. That baby needs warmth, and it needs that nutrients. So that's super important. And so progesterone needs to stay high in order to maintain pregnancies. So for women who struggle with miscarriage or have recurrent miscarriages, sometimes it is because her body just isn't producing enough progesterone. So even for women that I teach who are single, or they're engaged, or even if they're married and they're not planning on having a kid anytime soon, this is still very, very important to make sure that her progesterone levels are balanced. Again, for that quality of life, like I talked about, but then also because if down the road she is planning to start a family one day, she wants to make sure that her body is healthy enough to sustain that pregnancy. And that's what progesterone is. That's the reason why progesterone is so important. So it's kind of a twofold: quality of life, and then just also, maintaining pregnancies. So let's get into then, what are some signs of lots of bumps here. What are some signs of low progesterone? So PMS wise, oftentimes women who experience PMS often have low progesterone, and that's what's causing the PMS. So some examples of PMS are going to be irritability, crying easily, carbohydrate or sugar cravings. It may also be weight gain and bloating. Could also be fatigue or having headaches, even insomnia. All of these symptoms, if they're experienced for more than 3 days before a woman has her period. So again, the start of a period is the first day of bright red blood flow. So that does not include days of spotting before that. So days of spotting before that are not part of her period. So if you're having any of those symptoms for more than 3 days before the first day of bright red blood flow, that is a sign of actually diagnosable PMS. So PMS is kind of just like this term that's thrown out in our culture of like, oh yeah, I have PMS. Have you been diagnosed with PMS? Is this something that you actually know you have? Because this is a diagnosable thing, PMS, premenstrual syndrome. Also, somehow we've made it a verb. So you're PMSing. Like, it's something that so many women experience, but they shouldn't have to experience it. It causes a change in their quality of life. And this is something that is fixable. And oftentimes it is because of that low progesterone. Now, a few days before, like 1 or 2, maybe even up to 3 days before a period, if you're experiencing any of those symptoms, again, like I listed off, irritability, crying easily, carbohydrate, cravings, bloating, all of that. If it's like 1 or 2, maybe 3 days before a period you're experiencing that, that's just kind of a normal reaction to progesterone starting to drop, which is indicating that your period is coming soon. But if it's happening more than 3 days before your period, that's a sign that there could be a progesterone imbalance, or progesterone is too low, which are causing those symptoms. And again, that's something that can be diagnosed and treated. It's not something that the women just have to live with in their lives. No woman deserves to have, also cramping too. No woman deserves to have so much cramping that it's debilitating, or like 10 days of headaches before they finally get their period. No woman deserves to have that. So low progesterone could be the culprit to that. Now, also too, if I am looking at a chart, and also this isn't necessarily something you even have to chart, it's something that you may just see by being more aware of your periods throughout, just during your cycle, right? If you're just more aware, some telltale signs that I can see on a chart, or again, something that you may just be able to pay attention to, that could also indicate low progesterone. So premenstrual spotting and tail end brown bleeding. I'll describe what those two things are. So premenstrual spotting is going to be spotting that occurs for 3 or more days before your first day of bright red blood flow. So that's 3 or more days of spotting, whether it's red, pink, or even if it's brown, especially if it's brown, for 3 or more days before the first day of bright red blood flow. That is an indication of possible low progesterone. Now also tail end brown bleeding. So tail end brown bleeding, 2 or more days of tail end spotting even, but especially if it's brown, at the end of your period. So premenstrual spotting was before your period starts. Tail end brown bleeding, or even just tail end spotting, are going to be at the tail end of your period. So if your period just you start spotting, but it just does not stop spotting, and it just does not stop ever, for 2 or more days of spotting after when you're finished up with your period, that is also a sign of low progesterone. So that is something I can see very clearly on a woman's chart who's charting her cycle, but it's also something that you can just maybe even just be aware of. If you're aware of, when you're having your period, am I having 3 or more days of spotting before I really start the full flow? Or am I having 2 or more days of spotting, especially if it's brown, at the end of the blood flow, at the end of my period? Is it just continuing on? Those are signs also of low progesterone. The last one that I'll mention, which is more difficult to pinpoint if you're not charting your cycle. So I can see this very clearly on a chart, but if you're not charting, this is going to be more difficult to locate. But just so you know, if a woman, so on a chart, you can locate around the time that a woman is ovulating. And from the time of ovulation until she starts her next period, which again, first day of a period is first day of bright red blood flow. So we're not talking about the spotting beforehand if you were to see any. And so if a woman, between the time that she ovulates, which this is why it's kind of hard to figure this out if you're not charting, because it's kind of hard to figure out exactly the time that you're ovulating. But if we can pinpoint around the time that you're ovulating, what we want to see between the time of ovulation and her next period, which is the first day of bright red blood flow, we want to see 9 to 17 days of a post-ovulation phase. So if it's anything shorter than 9 days, that is also a really good indicator that progesterone is too low, because progesterone is the hormone that keeps that makes that post-ovulation phase long. It makes it, that 9 to 17 days. So if progesterone is too low, that phase of your cycle is going to be shorter because progesterone isn't high enough to keep it going. So if it's any less than 9 days, that's a good indicator for us, like, okay, there might be a progesterone issue here too. So that, again, like I said, is a little bit more complicated to pinpoint if a woman is not charting her cycle and not being able to know exactly around that time that ovulation happens. But still, that premenstrual spotting or tail end brown bleeding, that can really be seen on a chart, or even if a woman is just kind of paying attention to her periods when they occur and what she's seeing before and after. If you start seeing those, that's a good indication that there may be a progesterone problem. So how do we fix this? What is the solution to this? Because I don't want to tell you all these things about low progesterone and then not give you a resolution. What do you do to fix this? So in a clinic like mine, or any clinic that practices what's called NAPRO technology, I've talked about this too, but just as a quick overview. So NAPRO technology stands for Natural Procreative Technology. It's a type of women's health science that takes a look at the underlying issues of why a woman is experiencing what she's experiencing. So we don't prescribe the birth control pill. We don't prescribe any hormonal contraceptives, because for women's health, if there's any sort of imbalance, hormonal imbalance, or diagnosis like PCOS, endometriosis, the pill is only going to act as a band-aid to cover up the symptoms. It's not actually going to get to the root of why those symptoms are occurring and heal it. So in clinics like mine, or clinics that, again, like I said, practice NAPRO technology, these are clinics that are going to take a look at this low progesterone and actually heal it, actually fix it. And so the easiest fix that I know of, and again, I'm not a doctor, I just work with doctors, so I know a lot about their protocol. So the easiest fix would be, we would prescribe bioidentical progesterone. So bioidentical means that this is not a synthetic version of progesterone. This is not the same progesterone that is in the birth control pill, or that is in Depo-Provera, or that is in any sort of hormonal contraception. It is very different. Those are synthetic versions of progesterone. Bioidentical progesterone is chemically the exact same as the progesterone, the natural progesterone that your body is supposed to be producing, right? And so this can be taken in 3 different ways. It can be taken through a pill, a once daily pill. It can also be taken vaginally, or it could also be taken with injections. And so it really just depends on how deficient a woman is in progesterone to decide what kind of progesterone that she'll need. But it's always going to be that bioidentical progesterone. That is what is going to help heal this low progesterone issue in the woman's cycle. So what she would do is she would take bioidentical progesterone, again, from that has confirmed that she has ovulated through the remainder of the cycle. And that will help her body. So it's not every single day of her cycle she's taking this. It's only in the time that progesterone should be high, which is in that time when she knows that ovulation has occurred and she's waiting her next period about 2 weeks later. So during that time, in that second half or that latter phase of the cycle, is when she would take this progesterone to help supplement the progesterone that her body is not naturally producing. And so that would be the main treatment, or the first treatment, I would say, that I would see. Now, if that's not working, then, you know, obviously you're working with a doctor through all of this, because I'm not prescribing you anything. But that would be kind of the first level of how to handle this. If you want to continue seeing your own OBGYN, or you just don't have a doctor in your area that practices naprotechnology, you can also tell your doctor that this is what you need. You can be an informed patient and tell them, no, I don't want the birth control pill. No, I don't want XYZ. I want bioidentical progesterone. And I want it, you know, in that second half of my cycle. Now, you do need to be charting in order to know exactly the days that you're taking that progesterone, because you need to know when you are post-ovulatory, and you can really only accurately see that by charting your cycle, or if you're getting blood work and ultrasounds done, but you wouldn't be doing that every cycle, because that would just be ridiculous. So you do need to know how to chart so that you know when you're post-ovulatory, and it is best to work with a naprotechnology doctor so that they already know this stuff. They already know this protocol. But again, like I said, if you're working with just a regular OBGYN, you can be an informed patient and tell them what you want, and tell them, you know, this is how I would see to get there. So if you're unfamiliar with naprotechnology, or you don't know if there's a doctor that practices it in your area, I have a link in my bio. You can go there and type in your zip code or location, and it'll pull up all of the nearest naprotechnology doctors that are in your area. Now, also too, to learn how to chart, if you're working with a naprotechnology doctor, I recommend charting with a method called the Creighton model system, and I'll probably do another video on all of like the different methods that you can do to chart, but naprotechnology works hand in hand with a method called the Creighton model system. They're founded by the same doctor. And so I recommend working with a Creighton instructor. Creighton practitioner is actually what they're called. People who are trained to teach women how to chart in the Creighton model. So I recommend charting with Creighton if you are going to work with a naprotechnology doctor. So there is also links in the description below that will show, and I put these links in every single description of every single video of mine, but they're all in the description below of different charting methods and their websites to go and to find an instructor. So if you are wanting to locate an instructor to learn how to chart in any method, but specifically like I was talking about the Creighton method, there are links in the description below that talk about or that give you websites to go find instructors in your area. There's also online learning too, which you're absolutely welcome to do as well. So that is my spiel on low progesterone. Thank you for joining me on this drive home. It's made it go by so much faster. And I will see you again next week.